continue to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like, and tell us where you're joining from. We do have live interpretation in Spanish and English for this event. So for anyone needing interpretation, please go down to the right-hand corner on the globe sign. And we do have one speaker who will be presenting in Spanish. So for anyone needing a Spanish to English translation, please join the interpretation channel for English at the right-hand corner. Okay, we're 1 minute past the hour, so I think we're going to go ahead and start our meeting. So again, thank you so much for everyone who's joining us today. And we are part of the member connectivity subgroup of the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Group. So we created this group really as an idea to keep our members connected between our biennial conference and just get together and talk about shorebirds, really. So thank you so much for being at one of our very first events. This is our second webinar in the series, and we're hoping to put on several more this year or next year now. But now I have the honor of presenting two speakers who are doing really, really interesting and relevant work for shorebird conservation, really synchronizing habitat creation with working lands. And so I want to thank you so much to two of our speakers, Jason Hoeksema and Joaquín Aldabe. So Dr. Joaquín Aldabe is a professor at the Centro Universitario Regional del Este in Uruguay and conservation specialist for Manomet's Flyway program in the Western Hemisphere. And he is investigating how to harmonize bird habitat creation and conservation with livestock production in Uruguay during the non-breeding period. So he'll be our first speaker, and then followed by our second speaker, Dr. Jason Hoeksema, who is a professor at the University of Mississippi and founder and president of Delta Windbirds, which is a nonprofit dedicated to protecting and creating wetlands and really measuring how ecosystem services can be created by creating habitat for shorebirds during the migratory period. So we will pass to our first speaker, Dr. Joaquín Aldabe, and then we're going to reserve the discussion period for after both of our speakers. So please keep any questions you have and feel free to enter them into the chat, and we'll get to those after both of our speakers. So with that, our very first speaker is going to be in Spanish. So for anyone needing English to Spanish to English translation, please go to that interpretation button at the bottom right. And I'm going to pass it to Dr. Joaquín Aldabe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tara, and thank you all of you for organizing this very important event. So that helps us being connected. So I'm going to switch to Spanish because I think I'll be more fluent for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to present the work that we're carrying out in Uruguay to promote conservation of this species, which is the buff-breasted sandpiper, which is a migratory bird, long-distance migratory bird. It lives in the Arctic, and the non-breeding grounds are the grasslands of Uruguay and the south of Brazil and Argentina. It is a very delicate species because we see important decreases in the population. And also because it's very specific in the ecological requirements. It needs short grasslands, they need to be open, no trees, close to bodies of water, they have to be flatlands, and we don't have those features everywhere. Our main goal is to preserve the habitat of 5 shore lagoons on the east of Uruguay. In green, you can see what we have mapped. These are the grasslands that are around these lagoons, and there we have livestock activities. These flatlands around the lakes or lagoons represent 25% of the global population of these species. So this is an image of the landscape in the south. So you can see they're very flat, very open. We have short grasslands. These are all private ranches, so they all have owners and they are livestock producers. So we have to work along with them to be able to promote conservation. We have a program that includes biologists, agriculture engineers, communicators, and the producers themselves. And the mission that we have is for the producers to be connected among them in all 5 lagoons, because they were not working together. They didn't know what the others were doing. So a part of our mission is to make them be proud of having an adequate productive performance in terms of animal production, livestock in this case, and at the same time, we want to make them feel proud for having in their land in very important migratory birds. So our first question, to be able to reconcile conservation with livestock production, is what is the optimal grass height that the buff-breasted sandpiper needs? So we carried out a study where we selected the Rochas Lagoon. We were working in a piece of land. To the left of this map, you can see the plots or paddocks. And for 4 years, we did surveys. So in green, we have the plots that have short grasslands, is less than 10 centimeters. And in red, we have the plots with tall grass. And we did this for the sandpipers. And we can see that when we have short grass, we have a higher number of birds. And when we have a taller grass, the number decreases a lot. And the height of the grass is very dynamic, and that has a big impact in the distribution of these species within these plots of land. As you can see, in 2012, we had very tall grasses because we had a very big rainy season because of El Niño. We have a higher level of rain during the spring in the South Hemisphere. So if we don't have enough cows, then we have grass that is too tall, and then the landscape is not adequate anymore for the species. So they were concentrated in a very small plot of land, and we had smaller numbers as well. So we created these functions that correlate the occurrence with the height of the grass, and we can see that below 5 centimeters, the occurrence is 40% or more. And we also found that the plots that had a lot of trees were not chosen by the species. So with a 40% of tree coverage, the occurrence was a lot less. So this means that they need open spaces. And this is probably related to the need of seeing predators being able to detect them while they are far away enough to be able to escape. And well, the differences in the height can be minimal. Like you can see in this picture, it's only a couple centimeters. To the left, we have 10-centimeter grass, and to the right, the grass is maybe 3-4 centimeters. And this is enough for the birds to choose the right side and not use the left side. And well, the bodies of water, the lagoons in the south of Brazil and Uruguay, we have two sections. We have the flatlands that get flooded, or marshlands that they get flooded, and we have a higher ground where that it doesn't get flooded. Here in the picture, you can see the marsh and the higher part of the grasslands. Here in the marsh is where we have a higher density of species. And we know that cattle is important to keep the height of the vegetation, but sometimes that is not enough. Here we can see a situation in which the management that takes place has very high grasslands. This is about 30 centimeters, and to the left we have a height of 5 centimeters. And we also have a plant that is called junco. This is a native species, but it's colonizing and occupying the marshlands and the flatlands, so it's eliminating the livestock, and this is not eaten by the cows. So our idea has been to work with the producers to be able to tackle these obstacles. The question that we have and the main objective is how can we generate habitat conditions for the shorebirds and at the same time obtaining adequate productive performances, because we know that the main goal of the producers is to produce. And in this case, we're talking about livestock. So any type of management that we propose, if it is not considering the benefit for the producer, then they're not even going to consider the management plan, because we don't have other type of incentives like a tax incentive for conservation doesn't exist in Uruguay. So we have to think of management plans that are focused on production and performance. And specifically, we want to know how to make sure that in the lowlands we can have a grass height that is below 6 centimeters, and in the higher areas we can have taller grass. So why do we need short grass in the lowlands and tall grass in the highlands? Well, because the short grass is for the birds and the taller grass is to reserve forage for the cattle. So we don't want the cattle to run out of food. So how can we achieve this was the question that we had. That was the main objective. And in order to answer it, we used the knowledge that we have about the species, which was taken from scientific papers. And it is also very important to mention that we incorporated the local knowledge of the producers and the information about agriculture that they had available for us. Because a lot of times there is deep knowledge on the side of the producer about their farm, about their land, about how the grass grows, what the dynamic is with the weather, what the cow needs, and when it needs it. So we took advantage of all of that knowledge to design these practices. So beyond the papers, which I think are a very important tool to promote habitat management and to make decisions based on the science out there, I also think it is important to incorporate the knowledge that comes to us in a different way. For example, with innovation, which is development and design of practices within their context in the land and along with the people that are in charge of managing these systems. So it is a relatively new way of generating knowledge, and it kind of goes is developed differently when practices were developed outside of the context, and they were a solution that needed to be applied everywhere without being adapted to the local conditions or without taking in considerations the individual characteristics or the objectives of the people working in the land, their ability of working in the land. So it is very important to think about this approach, which is called co-innovation. And there is also another approach that has a similar name that is called co-production, and basically consists working along with the producers to be able to find knowledge that will allow the management of the systems to be more adequate. And I think this approach can be very interesting to work in biodiversity conservation, because I've seen a couple of times that when we have a conservation objective and we bring it to private property, the producer receives it with a kind of rejection, or they don't find a way to incorporate it to their system. So when it comes from a hierarchy, like from the top to them, then without considering the vision of the producer, then it is difficult to integrate it. However, if the producer participates in the design of the practices, adjusting it to their particular situation, then things start working a lot better. And co-innovation has not been used a lot in biodiversity conservation, and I think it's a great tool to use. Co-innovation comes from, or it's rooted in the 70s, Brazilian pedagogist called Paulo Freire. It's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he considers students as key stakeholders and active stakeholders in their own education. So they should be involved in the creative process. So it's very interesting because he thinks of education in two ways. One that is called banking education, where we have a specialist or the teacher that comes and deposits the knowledge in the person just absorbs it and repeats it. And we have the other side, which is a problem posing education, where the student, or in this case the producer, is invited to think and to reflect and have a critical vision of the situation to be able to solve a problem or an obstacle, and that way we can move forward in the creative process part of knowledge. And I think that this is very important, especially talking about biology working along with producers. So these are a couple of strategies for management that we have promoted along with the producers of the lagoons. We set up fences so we could have control in grazing, and we could keep short grass where we need it. Or maybe thinking about carrying out agriculture practices in the higher parts and the basins or the rivers that come to the marsh. Then that way we don't lose the nutrients. And also when we get flooded, then the grass is going to rot, and that way the grass is going to go to waste. So we want to think about a situation where there are benefits for the shorebirds, and we want the producer to take advantage of the grass for their own production. Also, we identified along with the producers that there are some species, like sheep and horses, that are ideal to keep our grass at a short height. And also an important recommendation is that because we have a short, high, or lower grass height, we have a smaller amount of food, so we need um, the cattle to have enough nutrition. So when cows are at the last 2 months of lactation, or well, the other way around, last 2 months of pregnancy and first 2 months of lactation, they don't have, there is a lower demand for nutrition, so they can graze where we have a lower availability of grass, and that wouldn't have an impact in production. All of that is gathered in a manual that, again, uh, compiles the local knowledge of the producers, their knowledge about ecology, about their production. They also participated in the creation of this document, and we invited them to review it as well. This was published in 2024. And to close this part, we are very interested in production. So our question was, do short grass produce enough? Are we generating enough biomass? And literature suggests that when the height of the grass is above 9 centimeters or more than 9 centimeters, we have a higher availability of food, and we have grass that is less than 5 centimeters. So that means less food for the cattle. However, there is a particularity in these grasslands around the lagoons. The rule doesn't work exactly like that. So we started measuring, we cut the grass with scissors and we dried it. And we realized when we have grass at 3 centimeters of height is a very similar production than when the grass is above 6 centimeters of height. So the shorter grass produces the same amount of food than the taller grass. In this land specifically, we also have other waterfowl vegetation, sorry, water aquatic vegetation that the cattle can also eat. However, we have not measured if this grass production means good performance for the cattle. So the fact that we have this amount of grass, we don't know if it translates to a certain amount of meat or a better body condition for the cattle. This is an open question that we would like to answer. We are actually working on a project to be able to answer that question. We know that the production of grass is good, but we don't know if that means that that is good for the performance of the animal, and that is a very important point for the producer. So, okay, I think I'm going to stop there so we can have enough time for questions and discussions. So I hope that we can have more conversations around these issues. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joaquin, for that awesome and fascinating presentation. We really appreciate it. And like we said at the beginning, we are going to hold questions until the end, but feel free to put questions in the chat for Joaquin. And we're going to pass it off to Jason Hoeksema now, who will present about his work. And thank you all for being here.
Okay. I want to start first by acknowledging various partners and sources of funding. So my affiliation is with the University of Mississippi and with the nonprofit Delta Windbirds. Key research partners have been at the USDA Research Laboratory here in Oxford, Mississippi, as well as at Mississippi State, and with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. We've had funding to support the work I'm going to talk about from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and also state wildlife grants from the state of Mississippi and the state of Alaska. Let's see. Okay, so just to set the geography where this work is taking place, this is in what we locally call the Mississippi Delta, which is the lower Mississippi alluvial valley or river basin. And that map on the right is from eBird data, just showing concentration of least sandpipers during fall migration. But it's a major stopover region for numerous shorebird species in the mid-continent, both during their southward migration and their northward migrations. Here, we, in our conservation efforts, have focused on trying to develop habitat for migratory shorebirds on working lands. And we focused especially during the autumn migration because in our region, spring is quite wet and there's a lot of water on the landscape, but in the fall, it tends to be very dry. And so habitat that can be provided in the fall is heavily utilized. We have focused in recent years in working with crop farmers to incentivize post-harvest flooding of crop fields. And for a longer time, we've also worked with waterfowl hunters to develop practices on private lands for managing impoundments for shorebirds, especially during the fall migration. One thing we've worked on in recent years with crop farmers is developing a contract structure that would help incentivize earlier flooding, because one challenge that we have found is that it's a very difficult period in the fall when farmers are harvesting their crops. They're very busy, and this is also when the peak numbers of birds are coming through, and a big challenge is to get farmers to prioritize making bird habitat during a very busy time of the year. It's very understandable that they would need to focus on other aspects of their operations. So we have a tiered contract structure that incentivizes earlier flooding after fall crops are harvested. I want to highlight some results from a research project that has been ongoing in one way or another since about 2018, focusing on farms that grow corn and soybeans, especially in Sunflower County, but also surrounding counties in the Mississippi part of the Delta. Just to explain a little bit about the experimental design for this research, we started out really with one farm and two different sites on that farm that expanded in 2021 out to 4 farm sites in the region. And in recent years, we've been working with about 8 to 10 different farm sites across this area. And in 2025, also starting to work on comparing farm sites to non-agricultural wetlands that shorebirds also use. The experimental treatments that we implemented in 2021 to 2024 are depicted here. We have focused whenever we can on working with farmers that have access to surface water sources so that habitat for shorebirds doesn't contribute to groundwater depletion, which is a growing issue in our region. So more than 200 farms in our region have tailwater systems where they have a series of ditches that drain water from agricultural fields and then pumps to store that water in what is referred to as a tailwater reservoir. And then we incentivize the farmers to pump excess water from the reservoir back out onto some of their fields to create temporary shorebird habitat or pop-up wetlands. We've used an experimental design for data collection where we have chosen at every site a dry control field, a passive flood field where the water control structure is blocked to catch rainfall, but we don't pump water onto it, and then pumping actively water onto the fields in the fall, in the winter, or both. Here's a quick animation to show the dynamics of flooding on a couple of these fields during the season. This is running from roughly early September through the typical flooding period in the fall, which is usually mid-November. And then we have often extended the flooding period through January, which provides habitat for wintering shorebirds as well. And you can see that water levels fluctuate up and down depending on evaporation and pumping by the farmers and rainfall. So this research that I'm about to present just a few results from has been implemented by quite a lot of different people. The guy on the right is a key collaborator, Jason Taylor, who is now here at the University of Mississippi, and Victoria Blocker on the top left, Pablo Bacon and Rachel Anderson on the bottom left, and they're representative of a teams of students and volunteers that have helped with this work over the last few years. Here are some key results from especially efforts that Jason Taylor's team was making to document ecosystem services that may be provided by this temporary shorebird habitat management practice. And it turns out that one of the key results here is that when you block the drains on these agricultural fields, which is necessary to create shorebird habitat, one of the key impacts of that is to greatly reduce the runoff of dissolved nutrients and sediment loads in the runoff water. So suspended sediments here, total phosphorus, dissolved inorganic nitrogen, phosphates, all of which you can see in the control fields, which are the red dots, are quite a lot higher. So when it rains, and this is mostly during storm events, when it rains, we get a lot of runoff of soil sediment and dissolved nutrients. And this can contribute to downstream eutrophication problems, dissolved oxygen being depleted, and ultimately to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And meanwhile, in the flooded fields, this does not happen. In flooded fields, the runoff is greatly reduced overall, and the concentrations of sediment and nutrients in those runoff waters are much smaller. We also have found that, in general, flooding of the fields has very little effect on crop yields. This was a concern with quite a few farmers that we talked to before implementing this practice. At one farm, this is our first farm that we worked on regularly, James Failing's farm, we have actually seen a fairly consistent increase in crop yields, especially of soybeans, following flooding compared to control fields. So control is on the left here, flooded fall and winter flooding on the right, and each pair of dots that are the same shape is a particular year, and the crop yields in bushels, the soybean yields in bushels of control field compared to a flooded field. And we've seen that really consistently at that site. At other sites, it's been much more variable and inconsistent, but the general trend is that there's no effect on crop yield across all the farms that we work on. All the blue dots at the bottom are soybeans. We don't have as much data on corn, but those are shown at the top. So this was actually a big relief to find that there was no effect on crop yield, or sometimes a positive effect, because that was one of the major concerns that farmers had about partnering with us on this practice. Other benefits reported by farmers include faster crop residue breakdown. And we have a decomposition experiment that we conducted last year to confirm that and quantify it. Increased soil moisture early in the crop season on flooded fields, weed suppression, and softer soil for planting in the spring. So quite a few meaningful benefits and very few complaints from the farmers about any issues or problems that they had. We've conducted waterbird surveys, as you might expect. This is Emma Counts, who was one of our central waterbird counters for multiple years. Others involved are listed there as well, who have contributed to collecting those data. And typically we survey every 2 weeks in the fall. We've documented 19 different species of shorebirds using these flooded field sites, 15 species of ducks and geese, including a key species, which is blue-winged teal, which uses a very similar habitat to shorebirds and is a game species with a special hunting season in the fall here in Mississippi. So farmers actually have an incentive to create teal habitat for hunting that also helps shorebirds. Some specific data from Emma's work showing just simply here higher shorebird abundances on the flooded fields, both fall flood and fall winter. This is shorebird abundance during the fall season. During the winter, one interesting result that Emma found was that we had higher shorebird abundances on fields that had been flooded in the fall. This is abundance in the winter. So at least in these couple of years here, shorebirds in the winter seem to prefer fields that have been flooded for a couple of months prior compared to just the winter flood field, which is shown here on the right. And from survey data here from Nora Bruce, this is data on a few specific species. Least sandpiper is our most abundant species, with some average count data shown on the left. Lesser yellowlegs is sometimes quite abundant on these sites. And then we have a smattering of other species that are quite consistently found at these sites. We have implemented in recent years a study to focus on shorebird health, stopover and movement tracking using capture and tagging and sampling from the captured birds. So using radio tags to estimate stopover duration. And of course, occasionally we are lucky to see a hit on a Motus tower somewhere else in the world. GPS tracking tags to follow local landscape movement to understand the relative importance of our flooded fields compared to other types of sites that the shorebirds might be using. And we've just begun tracking long distance migration of shorebirds who use our sites using longer distance tracking tags. And then, of course, we're sampling body condition data from the captured birds, and we've just begun also taking blood samples to start looking for pesticides and potential relations of those loads of pesticides with health metrics that we can find in the blood samples as well. So we have an awesome operation, usually about 25 volunteers. We operate for 9 or 10 days each fall. I'll be heading off for our final session of the year just tomorrow morning, in fact, with our team. Focal species for that work include the Wilson snipe, which is a fall migrant, but also a wintering resident here, a non-breeding resident here, and showing just some of the tracking data. This is using Druid Bluetooth tags. And the snipe and the dunlin, but especially the dunlin, tend to use a lot of other sites in addition to our flooded fields. But the snipe do really focus a lot on our flooded field sites, and our flooded field sites end up being hubs of activity for both species as they move across the landscape and locally use other sites as well. Those data are just beginning to be synthesized now. It's really new, so I don't have very quantitative conclusions yet from those data. Lesser yellowlegs is a focal species of interest, but we are not very good at catching them yet. So we don't have very many data points on lesser yellowlegs. We're going to start implementing whoosh net trapping, hopefully tomorrow, and we'll see how that goes. Occasionally we have gotten lucky. Here's a lesser yellowlegs with a modus tag that flew directly to Panama after a couple of days spent on our field sites. And lesser yellowleg seems to be very localized when it's here in its movement. So this is one bird that was here for 5 days last fall, and it basically didn't move outside of these 2 fields during the 5 days it was here. And then it immediately left, and then it left the area not to be detected again. The track up to the left was a high elevation exploration the day before it left. Least sandpiper is also a focal species. We consider the least sandpiper a common species that we want to make sure remains common, as well as a potential indicator species. We capture a lot of them, and so we can use them as somewhat of a proxy for what might be going on more generally with the other migratory shorebirds using these sites. So the least sandpipers are our focus right now for blood sampling. We have our highest sample size for radio tag data from least sandpiper and a lot of body condition data to go with it. I invite you to visit our MODIS project page. We have 2 MODIS towers that operate regularly at our field sites, and we're about to expand during the next year and add additional ones. And this project page can show you some of the cool detections that have happened either with our birds or with other people's birds at our sites. We have done quite a bit of invertebrate sampling to understand the food base for shorebirds at these sites, with quite a lot of different students involved in that sampling over the last 5 or 6 years. One conclusion that some of Emma Counts' analyses revealed is that we do see a positive relationship between shorebird abundance and chironomid abundances across sites, but a big question remaining is what is the relative habitat quality of these agricultural sites for shorebirds compared to other wetlands that they might have access to or might prefer. So that is the current focus of this some research this fall by my graduate student Oyinike Oyejide, who's pictured here, and Selena Zhao was heavily involved with the fieldwork this fall as well. So those results hopefully will be emerging in the next couple of years. But we're looking at invertebrate community composition and diversity across both agricultural and non-agricultural sites, wetlands that lesser yellowlegs are utilizing. We have had some successes influencing habitat management policy in the region from some of these results. We've engaged quite a lot with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service to inform the modification and updating of available conservation practices that farmers can sign up for through EQIP and other conservation practices supported under the Farm Bill. And this is just one example. EQIP 644 was updated based on our data to include a fall flooding option targeted to shorebirds. It previously only had an option for winter flooding. We also have conducted economic assessments of these practices to better understand what it really costs a farmer. These numbers here are maximums, really, and quite a few farmers are finding ways to do it less expensively, but we want to have the full potential costs to be transparent so that farmers can make a clear choice about what they're getting involved in. I also invite you to watch a short documentary that was created recently about this project that was really done very well by the people at Mississippi State University in their television production team, called Balancing Act. That's available on Vimeo online. And yeah, this QR code is for the Delta Windbirds website. I want to credit also Larry Pace, a local photographer, for his excellent photographs, including this least sandpiper standing on what is, I believe, the upturned roots of a corn stalk in a flooded field in Mississippi. So thanks for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Thanks so much, Jason. That was also super fascinating. And we'll open it up. Anyone can come off mute to ask questions or put them in the chat and we'll read them out loud. But I wanted to start off just asking you all, both of you, Jason and Joaquin, how do you think a species-centric approach brings a different angle to applied management research as opposed to a more ecosystem-centric habitat restoration approach? And how do you both leverage that when you're doing your various projects and your systems?
It's a good question. Well, from my perspective, it's kind of both. I think what we're trying to do is manage ecosystems, but with certain species in mind. And my perspective is that when we create habitat, it helps diverse shorebirds, wading birds, waterfowl, in invertebrate communities, and has ecosystem impacts, even if we have focal species that help to guide the work. So I think, to me, you need to consider both particular species and ecosystems simultaneously.
Should I speak in English or Spanish?
I think either, whichever you would like.
Español.
Well, to me, it is a lot easier to work with a single species because that way, at least in grasslands, when you focus on a single species, then you have an impact on another species, maybe a negative impact. Because, for example, short grass is preferred by certain shorebirds, but it's not preferred by others. So sometimes it's difficult to visualize what is the objective for the whole ecosystem, especially if the ecosystem has been intervened by human activities. There is not a consensus on how the ecosystem should look, especially in landscapes that have been used by humans for a very long time. So to me, it is clearer to work with a specific species because you know the requirements of that species, and that way you can define concrete action aimed for that species specifically, although it is true that you may be forgetting about other species or other aspects of the system that also need attention. So we work with a single species, so it is easier to make decisions for us, but whenever we can, of course, we consider other aspects of the ecosystem.
Thanks so much. I think we have a few questions in the chat. Are you going to read those, Jason Lager?
Yeah, I can read them. There's a question from Tracy Bornman to Joaquin. It says, fascinating presentation, Joaquin. Muchas gracias. I was curious if installing fences has created any movement difficulties for larger wildlife species. The fences sound great for limiting livestock and assistance, which assisting with habitat improvement for the sandpiper, but is there a trade-off where the fences have any negative effects for other wildlife species? Gracias.
Sí, en Uruguay no
So
hay.
in Uruguay, we don't have big mammals that could be impacted by the fences. Maybe deer could be a species to consider, but we don't have enough to think of a negative impact. We see that species that do get hurt by fences are rheas, or South American ostriches, the rhea. However, the fences that we use, that we implement, don't make a bigger impact than if we consider the amount of fencing that we already have in the land. So I don't think we have a negative impact on them.
Thank you, Joaquin. Okay, the next question goes to Jason from Santiago Munoz Bolaños. Jason, thanks for the great talk. I'm conducting similar work in the Cauca River Valley, Colombia, focusing on lesser yellowlegs. We're tracking approximately 24 individuals and studying macroinvertebrates in rice fields. Our goal is to work with rice farmers to ensure optimal habitat conditions during migration peaks. The question is, what are the most effective strategies you recommend for persuading producers to adopt these conservation-friendly management practices?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's really exciting to hear about your work, and I'd love to hear more about it. And we had one of our least sandpipers with a Modus tag ended up in Colombia not too long ago. So yeah, we have connections. I think from my perspective, persuading producers to adopt, there are a couple of things I would suggest, or at least from that have worked on our side. We've had to learn lessons, and it wasn't always easy. But first of all, we engaged with landowners through entities that they already trusted. In our area, the extension services of universities and also the NRCS, the USDA NRCS program, they have local conservation officers in each county. And in our area, those individuals are pretty well, they have good relationships with the local farmers. And so we started out by working through those offices to get their recommendations about which farmers to talk to first, who might be more open-minded. We have found that there's a lot of variation in the mindset of the landowners. Some of them are more set in their ways and don't have any interest in doing anything different, and others are more open, more interested in trying new things. And we got some really good recommendations to start out from people who knew them very well already. And those worked out. And in fact, I'll say there was one farmer we tried to work with that was not on that list of recommended farmers, and it turned out that was for a really good reason. And so we learned that trusting that sort of those local relationships that farmers already have, kind of leveraging that if possible, was a way to start. The other thing is that we found that just having face-to-face conversations and trying to meet people on the ground and just asking to talk and explain what you're trying to do and asking for their input and explaining your perspective, we've tried to prioritize that. And sometimes we've had trouble when we've kind of lost touch with our farmers a little bit, and it becomes just a contract, and it becomes just permission to visit the site. That's not enough, and that we need to prioritize taking time to engage face to face. And honestly, I spent a lot of time making phone calls to farmers and just talking to them and trying to understand their concerns and not dismissing them. So, but rather, and I think Joaquin really touched on this in some of the issues that they deal with, you need to listen to the farmers, listen to the landowners and what their concerns are, and try to work with them to find solutions that fit with the operations of the farm, the operations of the landowner. And it can't be one size fits all. You really have to be flexible and express that you are flexible, express that you're willing to work with them, that you want to try to find solutions rather than trying to dictate, here's what we want done, a priori. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts. But I wonder if Joaquin has other related thoughts, because that's a relevant question, I think, in his region as well.
Coincido, Jason,
I agree,
contigo, que
Jason, with
es muy
you.
importante.
I think It is
trabajar con
very
los
important
productores
to
y
work along
adaptarse a
with
sus
the
realidades,
producers, and we need to adapt
aprender de
ourselves
ellos
to their
también.
reality
Uno
and
aprende
learning from them
muchísimo
as well,
de
because you
los
learn a
productores,
lot
saben un
from listening
montón.
to them. They know a
Em,
lot about their land.
y
Yeah.
And
también es interesante que
it is
existen
interesting
abordajes metodológicos
that
explícitos
there is
para
a
trabajar
methodology, an explicit
con los productores
methodology
que
to be able to work
hacen
with
hay
producers.
metodologías, ¿no? Que
So
marcan
yeah,
algunas pautas
there is
para,
there are
para
guidelines
desarrollar el trabajo con ellos.
to develop the work
La
along
dificultad
with
que yo le
them.
veo a
The
esta
obstacle that I
aproximación
see
más como basada en el
to
contacto
that
directo
approach
y en el
based on
trabajo
direct
conjunto
contact
es
and
que cuando uno
working
quiere
together
escalar
is
estas
that when
acciones
you
a
want to
grandes
scale
superficies,
up
claro, es
this
muy difícil
work
ir a
to a
hablar con
bigger
todos los
surface,
productores, trabajar
it
con
is
todos los
very difficult
productores,
to
entonces
approach to
ese es uno de
all
los
the
desafíos
producers, to talk to
que tenemos nosotros, al
all of
menos
them. So
acá
that is one of the
en
challenges that
Uruguay,
we
es
are
como
facing, at
escalar
least in Uruguay. If
esta
you
forma
want
de
to go
trabajo.
bigger, or if you want to scale up this way of working, then it becomes a little bit more difficult.
I think we have time
Thank you
for
so
one more
much.
question. Oh, sorry, Tara and I are speaking at the same time. We're hoping to end right on the hour, but Jason, did you want to read any more from the chat, or does anyone want to come off mute to speak quickly?
Yeah, there are a couple of good questions in the chat, but it's hard to pick through them. So maybe we just keep going in order, and then we'll go. So there's a question for Joaquín from Gianco. It says, Joaquín, muy buena presentación. Tengo una pregunta
Joaquin, very good presentation. I have a question
relacionada a las características de los porteros.
related to the characteristics of the plots.
En ausencia de ganadería, existen otros herbívoros pueden
In the absence of livestock, is there, sorry,
mantener el pasto a niveles aceptables para los playeros.
is there another way of keeping the grass at an acceptable level for shorebirds?
O en teoría perderían hábitat aceptable. Muchas gracias.
Or in theory, would they lose acceptable, adequate habitat?
Good Spanish. You're improving.
No, we don't have any more native herbivores. We used to have more. For example, there were capybara that could be used to control the height of the grass. So we essentially depend on domestic livestock, but also flooding is a good way of controlling the height of the grass. So when the lagoons grow, they flood the grasslands, and if that flooding lasts for a couple months, then the grass beneath dies, and when the water goes, the grass starts growing again. So we have short grass, at least for a while. So flooding, it is also an important driver for the height of the grass. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're probably going to have to end it here. If folks want to connect with Jason and Joaquin over email, I don't mean to speak for you two, but I think they would welcome it. And one of our main goals for doing this webinar series is to connect each other here in these webinars, but also throughout time. So please feel free to connect with Jason and Joaquin, and to each of us, Tara, Kirsty, and Jason Logry. The three of us are organizing these webinars, and we welcome anyone's help. Our next webinar is going to happen in early 2026, probably March 2026. So keep an eye out for that announcement. And in the meantime, again, feel free to reach out to any of us with ideas or questions on how to get involved, and feel free to join our lists or join the WHSG listserv, the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Group listserv, or our Discord channel, which I think Jason will post in the chat. So if anyone else wants to stay on after the hour, we can keep this open for a moment. You can come off mute, but I think our translator, Claudia, has to leave. We thank you so much, Claudia, for the incredible seamless translation into both English and Spanish today. We really appreciate it. And one more thanks to Jason and Joaquin for speaking today. You both were excellent, and we really appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.